This is a story about views from above. I've never much cared for flying in airplanes. The crowds, cramped spaces, noise, stale air. The off-gassing of upholstery in small planes. On commercial flights, the ever-increasing indignities of air travel. I do, however, enjoy looking out the windows of planes at the earth. My father was thrilled by flying. He joined the Army Air Corps to learn to fly. Fortunately, after he became a pilot, World War II ended before he had to directly participate. A dozen or so years later, he bought his own airplane. I, along with my mother and sisters, flew with him mostly back and forth from our central Ohio home to our northern Michigan summer cottage. I remember being bored looking out the window at the uninspiring squares and rectangles of flat farmland. I remember beginning to perk up as hills, woods, and lakes came into view as we flew north. I later learned that this quick transition from farmland to rolling forests and lakes marked the southernmost extension of the most recent glaciation, where the advancing ice had scoured away the topsoil. Once the glacial ice melted, prevailing westerly winds off Lake Michigan sculpted the sandy soil to the north into hilly dunes before pine forests gradually took hold. Settlers mostly halted their early expansions here, where the fertile soil ended while natives retreated further north. I thrived in the North Woods. I did not thrive in the Midwest. The early days of my 9-month annual exile in central Ohio featured the airless, crowded, fluorescent confinement of elementary school, where the fare of mental stimulation tended to be similarly tedious. That is, until geography came along. Particularly fascinating and relevant to this story was a map of central eastern Canada revealing a vast roadless expanse of a gazillion lakes and continuous forests immediately north of my summer haunts. The following summer, my father proposed an idea for a day of flying. As a child and through adolescence, I would routinely decline his offers to go flying for fun. This offer, however, overcame my lack of enthusiasm for airplane flight. His idea was to fly north till we burned up a little less than half the gas, land his new 2-seater seaplane on a lake, have a picnic lunch, and fly back. During the flight, I saw what I imagined would likely register as fairly boring to most. Flat land with only trees, a lot of lakes, and a few rivers extending on and on. I was not bored. I was transfixed by the view, strangely awestruck and overwhelmed, while also soothed and comforted. I wondered if my father was feeling it. He was much quieter than usual. Back then, I didn't yet appreciate how vastly different shared experience so often is for each being. Now I imagine that without having to watch much for other planes or keep an eye on a flight chart, he was likely freed to feel the air, to feel flight through his hands and their extensions, the wheel and the plane. He, for instance, likely felt that we were going quite fast, while I experienced the earth beneath my gaze unfolding in slow motion, maybe time opening as it slowed. I remember my father once watching a raptor gliding and noticing my father's shoulders relaxing. I wonder if my father were still here, if he would recall that day of flying north over the boreal forests. When I was 20, I had a kindred flight experience. My girlfriend and I took a once-a-week flight from Bogota to Leticia on the Amazon River in a DC-3. For the last 3 hours of the flight, I saw out the window nothing but a sea of green, along with an occasional winding river. I was spellbound, hardly able to look away. At some point, the forest below appeared to be breathing. a little like what I commonly experience after prolonged staring into moving water, then looking back to land. I found I could easily will this visual motion to stop, then relaxing, allow it shortly to begin again. This felt good, if a bit disconcerting. I mostly let it continue. There was anxiety in such immensity, not to mention the precariousness of being within a flying contraption with nowhere to land en route. But mostly I lost track of these distractions. Perhaps it was the continuity of the view, maybe the concentration of so much life beheld, that yielded a so convincing experience of the earth as a being. I cherish and am grateful for these two remembrances of flying over the boreal and rainforests. They also evoke a deep ambivalence. I'm heartbroken knowing that those seamless vistas are no longer. I have since seen scarring over and over in photographs taken from airplanes. I know it would be a long time before these forests appear again as I saw them. Humans will probably still be around then, after the infrastructure necessary to sustain forest devastation has collapsed. It seems unlikely, however, that operational iterations of their aircrafts will still be available then to witness the expanse of the healed forests. Born into an affluent age of air travel, I now try to fly less and less. When I do fly, I'm still rather fanatical about booking window seats. While I hate looking down on the ravaged clear-cuts of my adopted Pacific Northwest homeland, I love contemplating the water and wind, time-sculpted terrain of so much of the arid American West. I sometimes indulge a persistent fantasy of ancestral spirits clambering into my lap to marvel at the views they've only dreamt of or imagined. Upon occasions of venturing further east on flight pathways over the Great Plains, I keep an eye out for crop circles and other designs made by heartland farmers on their machines. I take perhaps inordinate delight in their feats of seeming whimsy. Are these prairie farmers somehow a continuum of an ancient tradition? I'm thinking of the huge geomorphic sculptures and geoglyphs found in so many parts of the world. Most of these creations are perceivable as a whole only from above. Who are the intended audiences for such often massive earthworks? Gods and spirits have always been everywhere. For the so-called pagans and primitives, the gods mostly inhabited specific locales and qualities of the environs, enmeshed there in rocks, nooks and crannies, canyons, mountains, bodies of water, heavenly bodies, directions, distances. Then relatively suddenly and gradually, at least in so-called Western civilization, the gods came to be predominantly located in the sky. Unlike the sky gods of old, who tended to be inextricably atmospheric, identified with lightning, thunder, wind, the gift of rain, heat and cold, the new sky deities were mostly above, apart, alone, characterized as anthropomorphic and male. More or less simultaneously, there emerged a predominantly linear and historical conception of time, emphasizing lifetime and the chronicling of human exploits. Perhaps this was felt as a liberation from participation within a more cyclical repeating orientation, rooted in seasons and the circling of life, death, and more life and death, on and on. Later in the story, this Western, ideas that had been kicking around the southeastern Mediterranean for over a century coalesced into the story of Christ, a merging of God and human. This story was perhaps born, at least in part, from a dilemma related to the increasing emphasis on the individual's otherness from everything else, i.e., Life goes on, but what becomes of me? A scary notion if there ever was one. In the end, the story resolves this quandary in its death-defying denouement as the hero transcends the scene. Much thought has been given to the nature, metaphysics, and whatnot of gods. Here we are limiting our concern to the sky god's view from above and the impacts of assumptions accompanying such a perspective. A major upside to the view from above is that a lot can be seen at once. An obvious downside is that the viewer is removed from that which is perceived. Has such a removal been our downfall, or a detour, still redeemable via renewed appreciation for that which has been granted, then taken for granted? Eventually, the sky god's popularity began to wane. On the heels of a renaissance came the scientific revolution. Scientific methodology, revolutionary as it was, maintained the separated objective viewpoint quintessential to the notion of a sky god. Absurdly, as if observation and deduction didn't take place within a subject. Science itself, first via modern physics in the 20th century, then later primarily via the disciplines of biology and ecology, has begun to concede the vast limitations of this perspective. On the philosophical front, the deconstructionists have ridden to the rescue, valiantly slaying to a large extent the dragon of objective truth, a seemingly worthy quest, the truth being a banner so many have ridden beneath on their way to conquest and dominion. However, the deconstructors may have thrown out the baby with the bathwater, bequeathing us our contemporary radical relativism, where an obvious lie often accrues greater currency than what clearly appears to be what is being the operative word here, i.e., truth as a verb, and orienteering, a quest of being and becoming, not to mention the peace of mind afforded by proceeding as best one can. As the sky god's influence continues to decline, secularization has transposed the myth's disastrous premise of locating the mystery of eternity via ascension to an otherworldly place, yielding us surveillance culture, space cowboys, and robotic intelligence located in an energy-consuming cloud, not to mention authoritarianism's cure for its manufactured fear, a father at the controls. As notions of more is better and limitless expansion are widely accepted as a good thing, while we are offered virtual realities as our world is plundered. Such are some of the thoughts of this armchair psychocultural anthropologist. Actually, there is no comfy armchair, and I'm getting a bit stiff here in this tiny window seat, strapped in my seatbelt, breathing recycled farts, as I gaze down upon the beloved, and am somewhat consoled, even hopeful, if against my so-called better judgment. As I thus muse, I'm being instructed to return my tray table and seat back to their upright position. While this precaution seems a bit premature, I do sense a quickening of desire and excitement in anticipation of reunion, and I renew my vows to cherish, protect, and nurture in preparation for landing. But what to do with these memories of seeing forests going on and on? To hold these visions and to pray for their renewal is inseparable from grieving. Grieving is endurable. We have no choice. We have evolved to survive inevitable loss. We evolved in participation. We, like the gods, are facets of it all. Experientially, this is all we really have to go on. Meanwhile, what to do with our time? As one of the incarnate, a stakeholder and fairly conservative amateur investment counselor, I would caution against hitching one's cart to an abstract, definable, or even articulable eternity. Eternity, while a mind-blowingly astounding concept, well worth our attention, consideration, and imagining, seems, at least in its currently widely available marketed forms, whether the old-school pie-in-the-sky version or its contemporary secular knockoff, boundless progress and unending growth, rather preposterous. So I wouldn't sell the farm just yet. A better bet, tried and true, is probably the quite imperfect transformation via death, decomposition, and decay into new life, on and on. At the very least, it has an impeccable track record. Really, the only game in town, this swarming, churning miracle, the same old new ground of becoming, on and on. Now, we are disembarking, embarking, as if birthing from our liminal carrier, squeezing down the aisle, through the jetway and concourse to reclaim our baggage and be transported, shuttled, we humans, most of us like hungover space aliens, back to our almost forgotten and abandoned homeland.